Good afternoon. Today we kick off our inaugural high noon Zoom program, luncheon program, here in the high levels of Snappies in our new chamber office. Beautiful office that it is. Thank you, BJ, for allowing us to meet here. Wonderful opportunity. This is our first attempt at a Zoom meeting for our luncheon gatherings. And we hope to use these now and in the future to keep all of our members and others apprised of what's going on in the Evergreen area and the greater Flathead Valley. We have a small live audience today, and we have a lot of people that have joined us by Zoom. Our small audience is so our speaker will not just be talking to a blank wall. So if you hear some voices in the background, that is, pardon? We already have TJ Wendt adding things into this, so we're going to move him to the other room. Thank you to Terry Holmes. They are our sponsor today, and we appreciate their activity here in the chamber and for sponsoring our lunch today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first high noon speaker, very first, inaugural, as I said. I've had the pleasure to be both a personal friend and an emergency services responder partner with Sheriff Brian Heino, knowing him for a long time. And I hate to say it, that I knew his father very well too. Brian and I have had good times and bad times in our careers, our responding careers. And I like to think that there's been a lot more good than bad. But certainly when you're in emergency services, not everything is a good day. Brian will be covering several subjects today. If you have a question for the sheriff, use the chat feature and we will monitor those. And if time allows, we will try to give the sheriff an opportunity to answer as many as we can. Please welcome Sheriff Brian Heino.
This is going to be tough for me just because I like to move around usually. So they strapped me to the seat right now and that shouldn't go anywhere. But first I want to thank kind of this is what I miss about the office of sheriff is a lot of it is coming out and doing public interaction. And it's funny because when this first started, it was always like, you know, people were going, well, you know, how is it? And it's like, oh, it's not bad. And then as things kept going on, you start to miss the social interaction parts of getting out in the community and talking to those that you serve. So I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for the kind words. Mr. Mayhew, of course, has been a huge part of my life. And you know, I started out in fire services. And, you know, he was one of those guys that everyone looked up to in the emergency response. I do want to put a big shout out. It is first responder kind of week, we'll call it. And I wanted to thank those that serve our community from our EMS, fire, our dispatchers, law enforcement, and everything else. So if you do see them, please say thank you because it is unprecedented times, I think is the word we're using. So if you guys, some of you know about the sheriff's office, some of you don't. I think to start off, right now, there's a lot of ideas of what the sheriff's office is and how big we are and what we do. The first one is there's 63 sworn law enforcement deputies at the sheriff's office. We have a detention center, of course, support staff and everything, but we take a total number of 63. Out of those, 36 are on a patrol operation status. And this year was a pretty dramatic change. Through some contractual negotiations, the deputies now work at 20/80 schedule. They used to work at 19/80 and then they rotate every week. And now they're doing an 11-hour shift at 4 o'clock. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is, you know, our guys are committed to law enforcement in a lot of ways. And when you're looking at how to increase call responses, call numbers, and you're looking at the budgetary aspects of hiring, you know, 5 to 7 people. You know, a lot of the discussion was we gave them some incentives and they work longer hours. So we get more officers for longer periods of time. And then the other part of that was a street crimes unit went into place. Street crimes is kind of a thing that we had talked about originally. We were able to implement it this year, and it's it's supposed to be about a 6-person unit. Right now it's at 5, just due to staffing as we fill some vacancies. But their main focus is what we call the 6 and 60. So 6% of the population commits about 60% of the crimes in our communities. And a lot of times that group is essentially what we see day in, day out, over and over. And so when you're dealing with that, we want to be able to really work on providing that community safety. So by focusing on that, your goal is to reduce the 6% committing the 60% of the crime. The other part of that is special projects. So when they're working, it doubles up on your shift work. So we have right now 4 8-man shifts, and they start at varying times, but essentially there's 8 deputies per that shift. So at most cases, our minimum manning is supposed to go to 4 only. We try to run it, of course, higher than that. And then with the street crime unit, if there's an emergency call, they will go to that as well. So it's that immediate double up. So you get a couple extra guys right on those scenes, and that's a huge part. And law enforcement is pretty dynamic and changing. So we have an investigation, a detective division, which is 6 right now. That's staffed at 6. We have an ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, staffed at 2. We have 2 SROs, which I think this chamber is very familiar with. And we've been working through a lot of the things with COVID shutting down the schools, and now they're back into it, rebuilding those relationships, and have some stats on that if you guys are interested later. So a lot of the specialized units that we're dealing with are the technical aspects of what we're seeing in our career. ICAC is one thing. We actually measure, how much they're doing by how many gigabytes they're going on, and social media interactions and investigations of missing and endangered children, and all those types of things are requiring a higher level of technology. The other part that we've started to do is kind of move toward more electronic-based systems. I guess previously, a lot of the discussion was moving towards that. We have a new example would be a policy and procedure manual that is all online, and being able to look at computers to help us to better function as an office and organization, much like many of you do in your businesses. So a lot of that was implemented in this last year. But I think the big topic that we're all talking about is how to deal with the social aspects of what we're dealing with every day, and how is COVID affecting all of us. And I think the big one for us is that it has created, the best way to put it is a tension. It started off as being able to, I think we all we're in that unknown period, and now we're seeing a higher tension. And I think from the sheriff's office standpoint, we see it in several ways. One, our incidents that we're seeing with weapons and violence have increased, and our call numbers are increasing. And I think a lot of that is, again, that we always say, what are we seeing out there? And it's just this added tension in our community. And so a lot of what we're trying to figure out and do is how to best interact without interacting. And so we're still trying to reach out in our community senses. For example, I think we're doing a Halloween thing, a trunk or treat, trying to follow social distancing, but giving children some way to do something for Halloween, or going out and interacting with public events that are available to us. It's just we're producing videos now to try to say what the sheriff's office is doing. That's probably been the biggest challenge with the sheriff's office, is trying to figure out the best way to continue to interact without exposing more people to risk. The big question I get a lot is also, how has COVID affected staffing? We have had those deputies be restricted to stay home. A lot of times it's in their personal lives that occurs, but it does affect us as an office. We've had to cancel vacation twice. for 2 months to keep our staffing levels at a legitimate things. We work with our employees, of course, to try to not cancel, major things, somebody's going on a honeymoon or something like that. I don't know about you, but I would just assume let them go to that. So we try to balance that all the time. I think that's probably been the biggest dynamic, that is staffing, is trying to balance that all. We've had to call in our reserve units sometimes. I mean, just different aspects to keep that staffing level on an appropriate level. And a lot of it's been the confusion of when to quarantine, when not to quarantine, and those types of things. And then the PPE is probably the other one. Right now, we are requiring our staff to wear masks when they're dealing with the public. It's twofold. One, a lot of it has to do with that quarantine. Is if you are taking somebody offline for 14 days, that is a patrol level person usually, or you get an exposure in a specialized unit, you can wipe the whole unit out for several days. And so we're kind of balancing that on our sides. So I think the big part that we're all looking at is we still live and work here. I mean, the advantage we have, and I say this a lot, is everybody always asks, like, we're seeing these nationwide issues, I guess. And I feel pretty fortunate in that we have exceptional staff. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we just got done testing again, and we had, 80 plus applicants again. And we have, when you're looking at these top 5 or 6 candidates, it's tough. It's not like it's, a great discrepancy. It's somebody with military experience, law enforcement experience. I mean, just the whole gamut. And a lot of times we're seeing that stacked, like they have military, 3-4 years at a law enforcement agency, and the background checks, of course, that we're conducting all, verify a lot of the information we're looking at. So when we get done, we have these exceptionally qualified candidates. And so when we're getting down to the hiring and looking at our agency, we're looking at this package of, all of a sudden I've got everything from guys that were in special forces to guys that have, collegiate, college master's degrees, to educational experience, to anything, the dynamics that we can see, that makes a good organization. And I think that's been our fortunate thing at the sheriff's office is people want to work here. They want to live here. They see what's going on in these large metropolitan areas. And, to be blunt, law enforcement is getting out. They're done with dealing with the ideologies of law enforcement is bad. And I think what we've been very fortunate here is, I can't tell you how many letters I received just for support of law enforcement. And it's a lot easier to go to work every single day with your guys' support and being able to know that protecting and serving out there is respected and also appreciated. So with that, I had a couple questions sent to me, and then we probably have some more, but one of them was the homeless and transient issues that we were seeing here in Wada County. I'm sure most of you know that was kind of an unreal experience this year with a lot of the people that came. We had campers parked in places that if you went out to go recreate, every pull off, everything was full. And a lot of that was, maybe COVID related, maybe people getting out of those areas. But along with that, we had a large transient population that showed up as well. So from the sheriff's office sides of things, we looked at with our partners, of course, those that are dealing with shelter systems and food and all those types of things to try to direct them. The other one is we dealt with property owners, because property owners are generally, if somebody is not allowed to be on your property, then we, as law enforcement, will, remove them. And it was kind of interesting that the amount of people that we usually don't see. It seemed like we had a lot higher number this year. And I think that taxed a lot of the resources locally that provide services to those individuals, but also the ability to remove and move them on to different areas. I think in the defense, can I directly connect that with a higher increase in thefts? No, I really can't. I mean, I think, do we have a lot more disputes, with individuals that maybe were staying somewhere and the property owner didn't want them there? Yeah, we dealt with a lot of that. But I think the good news is the community has started to look at different options of what we could do to provide them opportunities for placement. Some individuals are never going to want that service. Some do. And again, I think the focus is always, this community has always been very generous when it comes to someone that loses a house or is in dire need and is looking for that, not a handout, but a step up to get better in their lives. This community is great at that. And I think that was the balance of trying to figure out which individuals wanted that and which individuals didn't. So we kind of, again, we based that off of when we got calls and to address that immediately with them. So the next one, what is the impact of drugs in the Flathead and the success of law enforcement efforts in curbing drug sales and use? Drugs are tied to about everything we deal with. I mean, specifically when you're talking about the violent crimes, the thefts, everything else. So a couple things to start off with. Methamphetamine prices have dramatically increased. So that used to be the go-to drug here, and the narcotics units are now seeing that price is ticking up. A lot of that connection is coming into the ideology, and a lot of these drugs are produced in Mexico. And so the availability of a pseudoephedrine, which is produced in China and those types of things, the availability of that to produce the drug kind of got messed up. I think the other part was the increase in border security had changed that a lot. So it kind of transitioned a little bit. We started seeing a lot more heroin, which is still expensive. And then, recently is cocaine. So we're seeing meth kind of, not that it's going down, but the price has gone way up. So it's hard to ask on Zoom, but the best way to put this is, if you guys have to have something, prescription medication, I guess, and it was $50 and now it's $600, and you don't have a job, and you don't have insurance. I'm just putting this out there. So what do? They start to steal. And so in order to get that product, now they have to steal, which is then connected back to our crimes and theft and motor vehicles and all those types of things. So it's kind of a big circle. They always say drugs are a victimless crime. And I always have that argument. I'm like, I probably not. One, you got the victim that, maybe the user. Two, you got the victims that are their families. And three, you got the victims that they're probably stealing from in order to produce or cover this habit. So that's probably what we're seeing as trends. What are we doing? Our narcotics aid group has been noted already in the last year as one of the highest producing for as many agents as we have. And they work a lot. They're working countless hours. They're partnering with other agencies. They're working with the U.S. attorney on a lot of cases. They're targeting like large groups, so essentially the drug trafficking organizations, and which a lot of times doesn't, it leads out of the valley, I guess, if that makes sense, which is good, but we're chasing those sources to the furthest level, and then they come out and they indict. Rough numbers this year, there's been, up to 20 indictments that you've seen in and out of the newspapers and those types of things, and the goals is those are going to keep on coming. I have to be careful because the U.S. attorney does a lot of the paperwork, and they do a lot of the media releases on those types of things, which I totally respect because everyone's out to prosecute that. But on the other hand, there's a lot more cases that are right on that edge of taking care of some of the issues that we're having. We also partnered a lot with the federal investigation procedures, because when we're talking about that 6 and 60s, guns are a big deal. Not in the fact that I don't believe in the Second Amendment, but guns are a big deal when you're dealing with somebody that's under the influence of high narcotics and selling those drugs, and then we're investigating them. There's a lot of dangerous situations. We've had several shootings that have occurred, just right here in the valley over drug and narcotics. So when we're talking about that, one aspect that we have is the ability to charge them with a drug user or sale in possession of a firearm. So what that allows us to do is immediately, put them into a federal system. They get time is time, and they kind of remove them from that ability. So we're using a lot of those tools in order to reduce that. So the good news is we're starting to kind of tick away at those. The bad news is that other people fill in the spots. It's kind of like sticking your hole in the barrel, and then there's another hole that pops out somewhere else. And then you got to keep doing it. And that's kind of the targeting we're doing. I think the big thing that we don't. A lot of us, if you've been to a large metropolitan area, and I was in Billings like a couple weeks ago, there's drug dealing going on right in front of you. I mean, and the big thing that you got to understand is, from my standpoint, that is probably the one thing that we do a good job at. I would hope nobody can drive down Evergreen right now and watch a drug sale. I mean, if they do, then of course I want to know about it. But the reality is it's very close. They stay within their elements. They do their things, but and we'll continue to investigate it. But it's not wide out in the open, which is what you're seeing in a lot of the metropolitan areas. Heroin's scary in the fact that fentanyl and heroin are starting to increase, and the overdose part of that is scary. I think the other concern I have, and I'm not, is the introduction of a legalization of marijuana is a little scary, and to me, in the fact that we provided stats from Colorado, and I understand that there's a lot of unknowns about it, but the big thing that we're seeing out of the other states that have already legalized is they get this black market that occurs. So my concern on that one is that I was in agriculture. When you're in agriculture and you grow wheat, you combine the wheat, you produce the wheat, it goes to a granary, it's recorded, it does all that kind of stuff. Marijuana is not quite like that. It's not like you have a harvester come in or a sales rep come in or doing that kind of stuff. You are literally, it's an open market. And so the issue that I have with it is that what other states are seeing is they have the legitimate businesses that go out and grow it and sell it, and they provide that tax revenue to the state. But if it's legalized, you're going to have all of the other groups that are going to start to produce and manufacture to sell at a cheaper rate, right? And that's where you start to see the dynamics curve a lot. Fighting over, I talked to one guy out of Colorado, and he says the violence between the two groups is pretty heavy. Like, if you get large cash bases that are going to be stored at buildings, then you get theft. And if you get two marijuana growers that don't agree with each other, you get that. The other one is DUI rate. Colorado's already seeing pretty upticks in that. How do you register? How high do you have to be in order to be under the influence of marijuana? All these questions start coming up. And then the other part of it is, for me personally, I have 3 children, and I already have a hard enough time explaining to them every day of the things that they see on social media and the world and everything else. This is now going to be right in the front page of the face every day that they drive around. I think that's the other concern I have, as a parent. So I guess the stats I can give you is that Colorado is getting about 0.9% of their budget out of that tax revenue. So it's not a lot. The DUI rates are going up, and the use under the age of 12 has gone up. So again, like I said, that is up to the voters. But from the personal side of things, I'm concerned for my children in the aspect that if you go to Oregon or Colorado, it's pretty wide open. And so we're all, as parents and grandparents, going to have to explain to our children, if this goes through, of what that means and the risk factors that are associated with that too. Just like tobacco and alcohol and all that kind of stuff that we already do. But I think everybody just needs to be aware that's one of my concerns that's going to come up. shoplifting part was the next one. I think a lot of that is tied to drugs as well. I know we have a lot of business owners here. I can tell you that the best thing I can tell you is we really do need to make that a crime. Does that make sense? It's listed as a statute, everything else. I know there's a lot of businesses that don't do any prosecution. And the issue with that is, don't think for a minute that that rumor mill does not go around in that world, and then they will start targeting those aspects as well. Cameras are huge. As business owners, if you are selling products, cameras are huge. And an evidentiary state, that is your best evidence, because you can identify them. Majority of the times you already see it, right? We'll push it on social media or whatever. We can identify suspects pretty quickly now because our populace can review video and look at it. Sometimes law enforcement can just look at the image and go, that's the same guy we deal with all the time. But that's a huge part of it. Good quality video, I guess is what I'm gonna say. Not the granulated ones that look like we're looking at Mars, but something that's definitely good. And I know there's a cost associated with that. But again, it's back to loss of value, right? So if there's thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of product being stolen, that owner is going to attach that to the costs that he's already, having to put on prices of things to get that back, which then just drives the costs for, our community. And I think the best way I put it is that those that we, can get video on, be able to secure and get them into things. I think the other part of it is it's a learning thing too. So if we catch a kid on maybe his first or second offense, and he has to go through the youth court experience, maybe that stops him from going down that road further. Because by the time they get into the long portions of it and they think it's okay, it's a lot harder to bring it back from that, if that makes sense. So I think that's where we see it. We recover a lot of stolen property that's never reported, and you can tell it's new. I mean, it's brand new, but there's no report on it. So we're in here doing a search warrant on a large building or whatever, and we see 27 pieces of stolen property. We know it's stolen, but we have no proof that it's stolen because it was never reported. It's very difficult as law enforcement to attach that to that person, to say, okay, this drill or saw or whatever it is stolen because we know this and this about it. Because we have to prove in a court too that they did that crime. The other one was traffic. The number I'll put out there is last year at this exact date, we had 35,319 calls. I'm going to ask the audience, where do you think we are today? Or no, I already gave you the number. I cheated. 33,987 last year, 35,319. We're over 1,000 calls higher than we were last year. So when we talk about call volume, it's always looking at what we're going to. We have a monthly meeting with our patrol guys and everybody else. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's the stat number. The blue line is 2020, and every single crime has spiked. And a lot of that, ag assault, theft, burglary, criminal mischief, those are big crimes. They are not a drive out, settle the dispute, move on. It's drive out, collect evidence, find out things. Do we have surveillance, collect witness statements, find out, who the suspect is, chase the suspect. But they're longer and drawn out cases as well. So, and a lot of what we're, like I said, why the increase, why the only thing I can say is that we are seeing that increase in drug prices. We're seeing law enforcement being more and more taxed on being able to respond to calls. So when we talk about traffic, I have to say, no, we have not been doing as good of a job on traffic as we used to do. But we do have a lot of partners, right? So patrol, all these other partners that we have are doing that. We actually have overtime shifts that are delegated to traffic enforcement as well, and we kind of target that. And then with the proactive stuff, we do a lot of traffic stuff as well. We might not write a lot of citations for those aspects, because what we're looking at is trying to catch somebody doing something else. So if I stop, probably the law enforcement stops you, ladies and gentlemen, you've never had a citation before, besides doing 115 miles down LaSalle, you know, it's going to be probably a candid conversation and say, yep, slow down, that's the end of it. But the ones we're looking for is, you look in the back seat and I see what appears to be drugs or narcotics or stolen property, that's going to further inside it. Or the guy's got a warrant. That's another one. So to slow individuals down, a lot of times we're working with Highway Patrol. Well, I actually had a good conversation the other day, and they said their DUI rates are actually going way up. And it's actually been this last couple of months is what they're seeing, a lot more alcohol. So to slow individuals down. The other one is traffic this year. I was nuts. I mean, the amount of people, like I said, in that 1 month period, I haven't heard numbers yet. I've heard a 20% increase in population. I've heard up to a 30% increase in population. I don't know, but I know in the summertime this year, we were really inundated, whether that be the park only being half open or what it was, but it literally, it was a pretty crazy time. We heard a lot of people trying to get to calls, and they had a very difficult time getting to calls, because once it's bottlenecked for 3 miles, you really have either a diverted route or take the opposite lane, which that's dangerous too. So you're trying to balance out what's the call, what's the emergency, and how to get there. So, oh, good question. So how are street patrol guys assigned? So it's by location. I always ask the question to everybody, like, how big is Flatty County? Well, it's 5,200 square miles. So the state of Connecticut fits in our county. And generally we, you know, let's just say we have 5. So you got 1 in the north end, 1 or 2 in the local, 1 on the south end, and then a supervisor is what we try to, you know, kind of run with. And the north end is pretty much Pinnacle to by Albany, essentially, and then you know, just north of the airport. Now we all know that majority of our calls are in the metro, in the larger areas. Evergreen is our highest, one of our higher producers of calls. I think the last time I looked a couple of months ago, it was right around that 37%, 36% of calls, but it is a large majority when you take it the totalities of all the other jurisdictions. So local is definitely that, but you gotta also remember that that local officer covers Marion, Kyla, all the way to Thompson River Road, essentially. And then, you know, the Evergreen area, support for Kalispell, wherever they are needed. So, so that's kind of how we break those individuals up. So, you know I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I think the big thing that I wanted to put up today was I'm really happy that we are where we are, because the one thing that we do have here is pretty good communication with our community. You know, I think law enforcement itself is a very noble career in the fact that we want everybody signs up to help people, to serve, to do those types of things. And it's a lot easier to do that when everyone in the room is trying to help a situation or a problem. I get presented with a lot of issues, you know. One they get hit with is mental health a lot, right? So we have mental health people that we have a co-responder system and everything else. But to be blunt, towards the end, I can't solve all the mental health problems by myself. I can't solve drug problems by myself. I can't, you know, that is all different things. And the reason we have a lot of successes on the crime sides of things is because people come back and say, I saw this, or I did this, or this is the guy, or, you know, that continue to help us. So I just wanted to thank you all for, you know, allowing me to speak today, being a part of this community. And I still feel we're pretty fortunate to be where we're at right now in this community, rather than what some of the other legislation. So.
Sheriff, we have a couple of questions from Zoom land.
Okay.
And you touched on both of these, but maybe you can expand just a little. You just spoke about the mental health full responder program. We have a viewer who is asking, is that helping to relieve the burden on the officers in the field? And any other comments that you have about that?
So yes, absolutely. So the co-responder is a mental health professional that goes out and essentially responds with the officer. Once the scene is secure, sometimes they can take over. It's a huge dynamic because we used to take the mental health person to the hospital each time. So that would tax out the hospital, but it would also tie up that person for sometimes hours. So that's been huge. The other dynamic of that is to catch that group of individuals that is struggling with crisis and an early thing and get them into the appropriate areas and having somebody trained to do it. In fact, at this point, they're looking at hiring a second person right now under a grant. So we would have two. But yeah, absolutely. It is saving us a ton of time.
Okay. Another follow-up from a Zoom viewer. Can you quantify the increase of incidents that involve firearms? Just expand on your previous answer a little bit. And how many do we see? How many crimes do we see that involve the use of firearms?
You know, the use of firearms, you know, I think we're still, you know, once a month. I mean, we've had some pretty bad ones. Officer involved shooting. We've had 3 officer involved shootings here, all involving firearms on both sides. And then, you know, they had the shooting in up by the airport. Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to put a statistical number like how many, but to actually involve the firearm where we're creating that major case investigation and that kind of stuff. One a week in the summer was we could get 1 or 2 in a week. Now it's kind of hard to determine. It seems like I'm not going to say the S word because I'll jinx myself, but it seems like we're tailing off on some of those incidences right now.
With the advent of COVID and people being locked away or sequestered and quarantined over the last few months, what have you seen in terms of things like child abuse, spousal abuse, and then how does that tie back to increased use of alcohol, drugs, etc.?
So a couple cases that a lot of reports went down when schools closed. I think that was probably one thing we noted was the amount of reporting kind of went down because you didn't have that school interaction. I remember talking to one of the SROs, and her frustration was she had built all these relationships up with some of those in that those tougher family dynamics that she was able to work with, and she lost all that for that period of time when the schools closed, and now they're trying to catch it back up again. I think the schools did a great job to try to continue to interact, to provide meal service, to do all that kind of stuff. I mean, Evergreen specifically, Dr. Barron really worked at trying to keep that going. But we still lost a lot of that connectivity. Sadly, the bad part of that is the sexual assault reports on children have popped up significantly again. We are seeing kind of that aftermath, I guess, if that makes sense. You know, those are the difficult crimes and cases that, you know, we in law enforcement deal with, and especially when, you know, you want to help. So yeah, we've seen an uptick probably more in the reports now that school's back in session and those types of things. So
we have a couple minutes. Any questions? Last chance. TJ.
Yeah, real quick question. Here. So the homeless populations tend to gather in some very specific places to live out there off of shady. You know about that, by the
possibly, yeah.
and then you've got behind Nick Charlie's that out there by the new U-Haul building. And so knowing that that's where they are, what can be done? I mean, they're bleeding into east side of Kalispell now, you see tons and tons of people, and it wasn't like that before. So how do you abate that?
If you could kind of repeat that question, Brian, for our viewers.
Yep. So he's asking pretty much with the increase in homelessness and having them kind of specifically in localities in Evergreen and Kalispell, how do you abate that? There's two real options. One is the property owner, so the state land where some of the areas you're talking about. So that to address that, we have to be advised they don't want them on the property, and then we can come in and remove them. The other part of that dynamic is changing how it's set up. Does that make sense? It's very dense back there. It's kind of remote, those types of things. That's where a lot of people that want to hide want to go. Lighting changes a lot of things, the things. So contact with law enforcement is one aspect of reducing where those individuals are. The other part is to change the environment we'll call it. Montana does that naturally in one case where it snows. And so when the cold and the weather starts to come in, we always see that massive reduction in people that came here from wherever. The other part of that is the service parts and dynamics of it is connecting them to those resources. It's hard in that problematic area because housing is, I don't know about you, but we're all looking at it. I mean, I hire a deputy now and I have to find him a house almost before I can bring him on because that's the dynamics that we're dealing with. And I think housing is the other problem. There's several organizations that are working on various shelters and those types of things to try to find them a spot. But again, I think the important thing to realize from the guys that are on the ground, a lot of them do not want that assistance. They don't want that help. They want to do their own thing, move on to the next neighborhood or go whatever. It's very difficult. And I think there's great men and women in the community that are reaching out and trying to do that. But the best solution I can give you, TJ, is that if we're having those issues, it's kind of almost like we need to sit down with the property owner, law enforcement, and say this is what we're doing. Because our officers will go out there and check. Like if we have that time, we had reports of, I mean, you guys remember Shopko was having some issues. We got some calls on that. We immediately went down there. We had guys start just stickering every car, kind of making contact with any individuals in there. And about 4 days later, everything kind of was gone. The same thing has to occur in those environments if we don't want those people gathering in certain aspects. But I think the hard part is we're all carrying individuals too. Where do we put them? And then I don't really have a solution on that one. I mean, this isn't Las Vegas or, we don't have a temperature variation that's not dramatic right now. We're going to be 2-3 feet of snow, and I don't know. And that's a difficult part. And it's not as simple as going out and offering them a job. It's a lot more of a dynamic than that. So. If you don't mind, I am going to touch on the mask thing. So I've been getting a lot of heat, as we call it, on the mask thing. As a guy in law, I look at law a lot because to prove a criminal case, you have to have the law, the elements of the crime. When the governor's orders first came out, and I suggest you read it, it says educational. It says this is not we don't recommend fines. We don't recommend any of those types of things. And in fact, it said that the main thing that with law enforcement they were looking at is if a business owner wanted somebody removed from their business, then law enforcement would go out there and go under the 45 code, the criminal codes of things. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. We've always had that rule. If somebody has an issue within their business and law enforcement gets called, we will respond. We will take care of it. I think my issue is that we went from the educational part directly into defining our commerce. And that's probably been my biggest issue with what I've seen occurring. And I have a hard time supporting that because I think the men and women that run businesses in this community are already struggling for COVID cases, for all this other stuff, and now we're attacking them on a totally different level. And that's my biggest issue right now. agree, disagree with masks, whatever, but it is that the right of that establishment to set the rules and regulations of how they want to do things. If I go to a bar and they say you can't move your drink, then okay, I understand that. Those are the rules. If I don't like it, then I go that business. But that's kind of where I think that line is that I really struggle with affecting commerce when an order has said that it was educational originally. And now we're going right into an enforcement action. And I think the other part of it is, I don't know about you, but you cannot turn on the TV without a political ad right now. And everything's political. I think if you're talking about education on masking and why or whatever, I haven't seen a lot of that. All I've seen is this back and forth on political. And I think that's part of the biggest thing. If I go out there and say, man, guys, we should enforce wearing sunglasses during the sunlight, I would probably educate, then go into the public thing, and then I would start an enforcement, and I would change the order or whatever the law to say that's what the case was. I wouldn't just go directly out and attack. So I think that's kind of my perspective. I think it's important for you guys to know that I that's my struggle, is that, and the other thing is, I live and work in this community every day. And I'm still going to live and work in this community even after I'm sheriff. And I think the important part is I have to go face to face with whoever this is going to be and have a discussion with that. And I just think sometimes sitting down and having a cup of coffee is better than drafting a legal document and throwing it at each other. So that's how I'll close it out. I know there's different opinions on it, but from my standpoint, I just wanted to say that. So.
You move on.
I'll move
Kelly
on.
moves in.
Yeah, don't go too far. Thank you so much for tuning into the presentation today. My name's Kelly. I'm the chair of the Education Committee here. And we want to thank the sheriff today for coming in. Thankful for the small audience to come in as well, so you don't feel like you're just talking to a screen. And also Terry Holmes for sponsoring. This was, finally, we were able to do something, and there's more to come on that, but we want to give the sheriff a little gift. We have a coffee cup from the Evergreen Chamber and a one-of-a-kind show and shine shirt. You can get your own here too. Come see Connie. But thank you for everything you do for the community. Thank you for coming in. Hopefully you enjoyed the presentation. Going forward, we have planned a few other presentations in the next couple of months and beyond that as well. Maybe soon we can do it in person, hopefully sooner than later. But the next one is going to be December 3rd. We have a couple of topics that we've kind of come up with, but we would love some input. Most people know Connie's information, so feel free to email all your suggestions to Connie, maybe even a follow-up to this presentation. And we're also going to be doing something fun called Tune In Tuesday. We have a lot of great businesses here in Evergreen, and we really want to showcase as many as we can. So look out for some additional information on that. We'll do some cool tours, maybe some interviews with some of the business owners, and you can learn more about the community here. So thank you again. And also this is being recorded, so you'll be able to check it out on Facebook and the Evergreen Chamber website. So thank you again and have a wonderful day.